The Russian Empire formally began in 1721 when Peter I, Peter the Great, proclaimed himself Emperor of all Russias, transforming the medieval Tsardom of Muscovy into a modern European empire. Peter's accession to power in 1682 marked the beginning of the most transformative period in Russian history before the 20th century. Peter's vision for Russia was shaped by his Grand Embassy 1697 to 1698, an unprecedented journey through Western Europe where the young Tsar worked incognito as a shipwright and studied European military, naval, and administrative practices. This exposure to Western technology and governance convinced Peter that Russia's survival as a great power required wholesale modernization and Westernization. The Great Northern War 1700-1721 provided both catalyst and justification for Peter's imperial transformation. This prolonged conflict with Sweden began disastrously with the Russian defeat at Narva in 1700. However, Peter used this setback to rebuild the Russian military according to Western standards, creating a professional officer corps and developing domestic armaments production. The war's successful conclusion with the Treaty of Nystadt in 1721 secured Russian control over the Baltic provinces, providing the empire with its crucial window to Europe. The founding of St. Petersburg in 1703 symbolized Peter's imperial ambitions. Built in the marshy delta of the Neva River, the new capital represented a deliberate rejection of Moscow's traditional isolation and Byzantine heritage. The city has Baroque architecture and role as Russia's principal port connected the empire directly to European trade networks and cultural exchanges. Peter's administrative reforms created the institutional framework for imperial governance. The replacement of the traditional Boyar Council with a Western-style Senate in 1711, the establishment of collegiate government departments, and the introduction of the Table of Ranks in 1722 modernized Russian administration and created a merit-based civil service. The Table of Ranks revolutionized Russian society by making state service, rather than hereditary nobility, the primary path to social advancement. The death of Peter the Great in 1725 initiated the era of palace revolutions, during which the throne changed hands frequently through coups. This instability ended with Catherine II, Catherine the Great, in 1762. Who ruled for 34 years and extended Russian power to unprecedented heights. Catherine's reign witnessed the most dramatic territorial expansion in Russian history. The successful conclusion of two Russo-Turkish wars, 1768 to 1774 and 1787 to 1792, secured Russian control over the northern Black Sea coast. The annexation of Crimea in 1783 eliminated the last remnant of Mongol power and provided Russia with year-round naval facilities. These conquests opened vast new territories for colonization and provided access to warm water ports that had been a Russian strategic goal for centuries. The partitions of Poland 1772-1793, 1795. Conducted with Prussia and Austria, eliminated Europe's largest republic and brought millions of Poles, Lithuanians, and other nationalities under Russian rule. Catherine justified these acquisitions as recovery of ancient Russian lands, though they introduced complex ethnic and religious minorities that would challenge imperial unity throughout the empire's existence. Catherine's domestic policies reflected her commitment to Enlightenment ideals adapted to Russian conditions. Her instruction nakaz of 1767 outlined progressive legal principles and called for comprehensive legal reform. The provincial reform of 1775 created a more efficient and uniform system of local government. The Pugachev Rebellion 1773-1775, led by the Cossack Emilian Pugachev, represented the most serious internal challenge to Catherine's rule. This massive uprising of peasants, Cossacks, and non-Russian minorities revealed deep social tensions within the empire. Catherine's harsh suppression was followed by increased restrictions on peasant rights and the expansion of serfdom into newly conquered territories. Alexander I's accession in 1801 coincided with Napoleon Bonaparte's rise and the beginning of a quarter-century of European warfare that would test the Russian Empire's strength. Alexander, influenced by Enlightenment thought and advisors like Mikhail Speransky, initially pursued liberal reforms including plans for constitutional monarchy and serf abolition, though foreign war pressures limited implementation. Russia's participation in coalitions against Napoleon established the empire as Europe's primary Eastern power. The War of the Third Coalition 1805 ended disastrously at Austerlitz. But the Treaty of Tilsit 1807 temporarily aligned Russia with France. This alliance proved unstable due to conflicting interests over Poland and trade restrictions. The Napoleonic invasion of Russia in 1812 became the defining moment of Alexander's reign. Napoleon's Grande Armée of over 600,000 men represented the largest military force in European history to that point. The Russian strategy of strategic retreat, exemplified by General Kutuzov's decision to abandon Moscow, allowed the harsh Russian winter and extended supply lines to destroy Napoleon's army. Fewer than 40,000 soldiers of the original Grande Armée survived the campaign. Russia's victory transformed the empire into Europe's dominant military power and Alexander into the liberator of Europe. Russian troops marched into Paris in 1814, and Alexander played a crucial role in Napoleon's abdication. At the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, Russia gained control over most of Poland, creating the Congress Kingdom in personal union with the Russian Empire. The Decembrist uprising of December 14, 1825, marked the end of Alexander's reign. This revolt by liberal military officers demanded constitutional government and serf abolition. Though quickly suppressed by Nicholas I, the Decembrist revolt demonstrated growing Western political influence among educated Russians and presaged future revolutionary movements. Nicholas I's 30-year reign represented the high point of Russian autocracy and the most systematic attempt to create a unified empire based on orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality. Traumatized by the Decembrist revolt, Nicholas dedicated himself to preventing revolutionary contagion and suppressing challenges to autocratic authority. The codification of laws, completed under Speransky in 1833, represented Nicholas's most significant domestic achievement. This project systematized Russian law for the first time since 1649 and created the legal framework for modern imperial administration. The 45-volume complete collection of laws and 15-volume code of laws provided legal uniformity across the empire's vast territories. Nicholas's reign witnessed significant territorial expansion. The Russo-Turkish War of 1828 to 1829 secured Greek independence and expanded Russian Balkan influence. The conquest of the Caucasus, requiring decades of brutal warfare against Muslim mountaineers led by Shamol, incorporated strategically important territories. The acquisition of Alaska through the Russian-American Company extended imperial influence to North America. The suppression of the Polish uprising of 1830 to 1831 eliminated Polish autonomy and demonstrated Nicholas's commitment to imperial centralization. The abolition of the Polish Constitution, closure of Warsaw University, and Russification policies established patterns of ethnic assimilation applied throughout the empire. Nicholas's foreign policy established Russia as the gendarme of Europe, committed to suppressing revolutionary movements. Russian intervention in Hungary in 1849 demonstrated the empire's willingness to use military force to maintain conservative European order. Though this created tensions with Western powers and contributed to diplomatic isolation during the Crimean War. The Crimean War 1853–1856 exposed the Russian Empire as fundamental weaknesses and initiated the most comprehensive reform period in imperial history. Russia's defeat by Britain, France, and Turkey revealed technological backwardness, administrative inefficiency, and social contradictions. The war's enormous costs demonstrated that Russia could not compete with Western powers without fundamental modernization. Alexander II's accession in 1855 marked the beginning of the Great Reforms. The most significant was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861, freeing over 40 million peasants from bondage and fundamentally altering Russia's social structure. Though the emancipation's terms favored landowners and left peasants with inadequate land and heavy redemption payments, it eliminated the institution that had defined Russian society for centuries. The judicial reform of 1864 established an independent judiciary based on Western models, introducing trial by jury, public proceedings, and professional judges. The Zemstvo reform created elected local assemblies responsible for education, healthcare, and infrastructure, providing Russia's first experience with representative government. The military reforms of 1874 abolished selective conscription and created a modern army based on universal service. These reforms unleashed forces that transformed the empire. The Trans-Siberian Railway, begun in 1891, connected European Russia with the Pacific. Industrial development accelerated dramatically, with textile production in Moscow, heavy industry in the Urals, and oil extraction in Baku, creating a modern industrial economy. The emancipation created a mobile labor force that fueled urban growth. However, the Great Reforms generated new tensions and political opposition. The growth of an educated middle class, emergence of an industrial working class, and peasant poverty created discontent. Revolutionary movements, including the populist Narodnaya Volya, turned to terrorism. Alexander II fell victim to revolutionary terrorism when assassinated in 1881, ending the Reform era. Alexander III's accession initiated political reaction known as the Counter-Reforms. Convinced that his father's liberalism encouraged revolutionary activity, Alexander III reversed progressive policies and strengthened autocratic control. The reign saw increased censorship, restrictions on university autonomy, and appointment of land captains who reduced peasant self-government. The rapid industrialization of the 1890s, promoted by Finance Minister Sergei Witte, transformed Russia into a major industrial power but created new social problems. Factory cities, deplorable working conditions, and a radical industrial proletariat provided fertile ground for revolutionary movements. The Social Democratic Party, 1898, and Socialist Revolutionary Party, 1902, organized opposition to autocratic rule. Nicholas II's accession in 1894 brought a weak ruler to the throne during mounting challenges. The Russo-Japanese War 1904–1905, Russia's first defeat by a non-European power, shattered autocratic invincibility and triggered the 1905 revolution. Mass strikes, peasant uprisings, and military mutinies forced Nicholas to grant the October Manifesto, promising constitutional government and civil liberties. The Revolution of 1905 introduced limited constitutional monarchy through the establishment of the Duma, Parliament, and the Fundamental Laws of 1906. Russia's entry into World War I in 1914 exposed continued vulnerabilities despite modernization. Military disasters, including the destruction of entire armies at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes, revealed persistent problems with leadership, equipment, and logistics. The war's enormous casualties, economic disruption, and administrative breakdown discredited the autocracy. The February Revolution of 1917 began as spontaneous strikes in Petrograd, but quickly spread throughout the empire, forcing Nicholas II's abdication on March 15, 1917. Collapse of autocracy after 3 centuries of Romanov rule occurred with remarkable speed, reflecting the complete loss of legitimacy suffered by the imperial system. The provisional government that replaced the autocracy promised democratic reforms and continued war participation, but faced the impossible task of governing during military collapse and social revolution. The dual power system, with the provisional government sharing authority with the socialist Petrograd Soviet, proved inherently unstable. Lenin's return from exile in April 1917 and his April theses calling for immediate peace, land redistribution, and Soviet power provided a clear alternative to moderate policies. The October Revolution of 1917, led by Lenin's Bolsheviks, overthrew the provisional government and established the world's first communist state. The Bolshevik victory ended both the Russian Empire and the broader European imperial age. The Russian Empire's collapse in 1917 ended one of history's largest and most enduring empires, spanning 11 time zones and encompassing over 170 ethnic groups. The empire's expansion from the small Muscovite principality to transcontinental power demonstrated the effectiveness of centralized autocracy in territorial conquest and defense, though its failure to adapt to modern political demands revealed autocratic limitations. The empire's cultural achievements in literature, music, and arts created a distinctive Russian civilization influencing global culture. Writers like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, composers like Tchaikovsky, and scientists like Mendeleev contributed to world culture while expressing distinctively Russian perspectives. The empire's approach to governing diverse populations combined pragmatic accommodation with periodic Russification campaigns. While minorities often retained cultural autonomy and religious freedom, the empire's goal remained creating unified Russian identity. This tension between imperial unity and ethnic diversity was inherited by the Soviet Union and continues influencing contemporary Russian politics. Understanding the Russian Empire's history provides essential context for comprehending modern Russian political culture, international relations, and governance approaches. The empire's legacy of centralized authority, territorial expansion, and cultural distinctiveness continues influencing Russian identity and foreign policy in the contemporary world.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.